This video contains all the concepts and tools you'll need to create a balanced and dynamic competitive 1v1 map for Advanced Wars by Web. We will look into the three main map design concepts that are balance, general layout, and front design. This will be by no means a guarantee that your map will make it into the global league, but it will definitely help your map get through the most important initial checks. After this, it's mostly a back and forth cycle of testing and editing the map to identify and solve problems. Once the map is well balanced and dynamic, it could be considered for competitive matches. Before starting, I need to give massive thanks to the map community and wise map makers of our community. This video was made with their collaboration and knowledge of map design. We hope this will help guide and encourage new map makers. First of all, a map needs to be balanced, and to do this, you will want to keep in mind the following things. A symmetric map is the easiest and safest way to ensure your map is balanced, as it will provide both players with the same options. The map editor has an integrated tool with different types of symmetry to help map designers, as it will duplicate the tile you're placing on the opposite side of the map according to the symmetry selected. While they're technically not always imbalanced, in general you want to avoid having instant win features like contested bases and missile silos, since these will transform the map into an over-centralized minigame of who can control them. This means that small, otherwise inconsequential imbalances can have a big effect. Just as in any turn-based strategy game, being player 1 will naturally have a big advantage. That's why Advanced Wars by Web focuses a lot on having proper FTA counters to balance player 1 and player 2 as much as possible. And the community has actually done a really good job at this. There's a very good video made by Go7 about FTA which I will link in the description. There are different ways of having proper FTA counters. They will depend on the map and the mode. The main idea for an FTA counter is to balance unit count and funding curve for each player. Each player should be about half a turn ahead in both metrics at the end of their turn on a balanced map. Another important consideration when evaluating FTA is tank order. This applies specifically for tanks on standard and fog maps, though the same concept applies in high funds as well, just with higher tech units. You want to make sure that in the scenario that both players go for no base skips and a capture phase for the fastest income, that their funding will allow them to buy tanks in AWBW or BAAB order. Balancing early tank order is important because generally tanks will be the first vehicles to reach the fronts, and so they will have the most impact on who can control the contested areas. Imbalanced tank order can create an early advantage in funding and positioning for one player that is difficult to overcome. There are more complex vehicle orders, for example involving recons, artillery, or copters, that might need to be considered for FTA, but we will have to leave that for another time as more advanced concepts that won't be covered in this video. You can always ask an MC for help with some of these more advanced concepts. Once you can create a balanced map, the next section we need to talk about is the general layout of the map. This will determine how games on the map will look like. It defines roughly where each player will be strong and weak and where the fighting will take place. Keep the amount of bases per player between 2 or 3, and if it's a mixed base setup, you could go up to 4. An interesting way of looking at this is to analyze the base to front ratio. Try to have every base be responsible for either 1 or 2 fronts. You can see this on more standard maps where 2 bases might be responsible for a single front, while on mixed base, a single base might be responsible for 2 fronts. You want to avoid going beyond this range. Having too many bases for a single front will lead to too many units, which can end in a big stall. And having too many fronts for a single base will lead to very scarce unit numbers, limiting the tactics available. Regarding airports, anything between 0 and 2 airports per player should be fine, but the highly suggested number, especially for new map makers, is to stick with 1 airport per player. A very similar thing could be said about Comm Towers. From 0 to 2 is fine, but the highly suggested number for new map makers is to have 1 Comm Tower per player. You want to keep the distance from the bases to fronts somewhere in between 1.5 to 4 tank turns. The sweet spot will usually be around 2 to 3 turns, but it will depend mostly on the mode. Usually standard and high funds maps can be on the lower end, while fog can be on the higher end. What you want to avoid is having the distance be too small, causing reinforcements to arrive too quickly, which means that threats can be answered at any time, which can lead into big stalls. And you want to avoid having the distance be too big, or else games will take forever. Regarding income, you want to avoid having too little income, which will result in too many infantry and very few vehicles. And you want to avoid having too much income, which leads to very few infantry and too many tech-ups, which can make it harder to consolidate advantages. It helps to think of this in an income per base ratio. The ideal ratio will vary by mode, but a good rule of thumb will be the ranges you see on screen. Just keep in mind that higher income tends to benefit strong power-based COs like global damage ones, while lower income tends to benefit stronger day-to-day COs. Terrain plays a huge role in how your map will play out. Hard terrain like mountains, rivers and sea tiles will shape where the fronts occur. Try to avoid having a lot of empty space on the map, like large amounts of sea tiles surrounding an island, or just vast amounts of plains on areas of the map where there's no fighting. Try to give a purpose to every section of the map. Places with heavy terrain are very hard to fight in, since they're very good for defense, so you want to use it to guide units towards more open, contested areas where fighting can take place. The general map archetypes will usually have a strong side and a weak side. You can see this with the classic 2 base versus 1 base setups. You can think of airports as half a base, as they'll increase the local strength. You can have a 2 base 1 airport versus 1 base setup for a damage race, or you can have a 2 base versus 1 base 1 airport for a more balanced setup. In base light, the airport placement will most likely determine the strong side. It's common to use the 2Q Symmetry tool to achieve these kinds of setups, so you can have those stronger sides versus weaker sides, which generate very dynamic play. Using other symmetries like X, Y or diagonal are very limited because they will always have the same sides facing each other. This lack of strength imbalance can lead to big stalls. Finding the right HQ position on the map can be very tricky. You want to try to place it somewhere it's far enough from the front lines to avoid them being contested or cheesed, but you also want it far enough from the bases so that a player can capture the enemy's HQ once they have a very strong advantage, to avoid the game from drying out too long. You can also try using multiple labs instead of HQs, especially in a mixed base setup where nowhere is really that safe. In fog maps, you will often see a pre-deployed black bolt sitting on the HQ. This is to prevent possible early HQ capture cheese, usually by Sami, while still placing the HQ in an area that isn't too safe. The front is where the vast majority of action will take place on your map. Therefore, it is the most important part of the map, and most of your time when making the map should be spent correspondingly on the terrain in these areas. The key point about front design is that Advance Wars by Web's mechanics naturally encourage playing defensively. So maps have to be designed to overtly reward attacking while keeping defensive features at a minimum to avoid stalemates. This is what is meant by encouraging dynamic play, which is a must for competitive matches. All of the following points about front design flow down from this. Fronts should be relatively open to create room for attacks, and make defending not a no-brainer. For example, avoid having 1 or 2 tile choke points. Heavy terrain is used primarily to form where the fronts will be, but should be used sparingly on the front itself. Reward players for controlling contested areas where they can capture properties, towers, or even lock enemy airports. If there is no incentive to push forward, there will be no action. If there are fronts that are much less valuable to control, they will likely be ignored. So you don't want one front to be significantly more important than others. Having control of the center of the map will always be very strong, so a good way of ensuring that every match doesn't become a win mid, win game is to lessen the value of the center. You can do this by increasing the value of the corners or sides of the map, by having a few more properties, and by having either one pair or no cities in the center, along with low defense terrain to avoid camping. Think about how connected the fronts are. Highly separated fronts tend more towards damage race scenarios, while connected fronts lead more to deathball. A pretty safe rule of thumb for standard and high funds is to make it possible to front switch, but not easy. If it's too connected, you make it easy to defend by covering all possible threats and attacking becomes difficult. Consider the shape of the front as well. A front that is in a straight horizontal or vertical line will often lead to stalls, as straight lines leave fewer tiles available to attack into. Try to shape fronts so that units will naturally be arranged on diagonals, making it harder to defend and easier to flank. If the map is going to be for standard, then you can have some choky areas, by using hard terrain like sea, mountain or river tiles. But you also want to have variety, by having certain fronts a bit choky and other fronts a bit more open. If it's for fog, keep it open, and allow armies to easily switch fronts. Also, limit the amount of forests and mountains in contested areas since they become kind of overpowered in fog. Fog is naturally more defensive due to the lack of vision, so the map has to be really aimed at nerfing defenses. For a high funds map, you can have a similar approach as you would with standard, but in high funds, more units will be viable, so you can experiment a bit more. One important difference is that ports are very strong in high funds, so keep in mind the effect that deploying battleships and carriers on them would have when placing ports in the map. Lastly, you want to be mindful of where you place cities and terrain from the bases to the fronts. This can get very complex very fast, so we won't dive too deep. Just aim to create meaningful decisions. Regarding cities, try to place cities so that different capture routes are possible, with different pros and cons, like having to decide whether to capture the airport first, or going for a 2-city chain instead, or whether to move backwards for quicker income versus skipping captures to rush for a city closer to the fronts. Regarding terrain, have different routes that will arrive at different areas faster. Using a forest here or there can make a tank arrive quicker at one contested city on one route or another contested city on a different route. The site doesn't have an autosave function yet, so make sure that you save every now and then. Closing the tab without saving will delete every change you did since the last save. If you accidentally click to a new page, don't panic because the back button will often still have your edits. Once you have finished with your map, hit save and then go back to your maps and hit publish map. This will enable other users to see and create matches on your map. To edit a map, there has to be no active games. So if there are matches and you want to do an edit, you can unpublish the map so that no new matches are created and then just wait until the current ones end. Then you can edit and hit publish again for new matches to be created. The map committee looks at new maps that are created, but they are a small team of volunteers and there are tons and tons of maps published every day, so be patient and give them time. For quicker feedback, you can post a link to your map or a screenshot of it on the Design Maps channel of the Advanced Wars by Web Discord server, where you can get feedback from other players and MC members. A really great extension is the Gamer ASD's Design Maps Improved, which I will link in the description. It has an autosave function, it will check if every tile is mirrored correctly, it also gives you a total for every tile type, a total income count, a total income per player count, and even a total income per base count. On top of that, it allows you to expand or shrink any amount of columns or rows from your map. It kind of has everything you'd want to have when designing a map, so it's a must-have if you ask me. I want to give a quick reminder that everything in this video is to create a map for competitive play, aimed at getting reviewed for global league, tournaments, or any other future competitive format. This is different from casual play, where you can simply do whatever you want with a map. But you could also use some of these concepts to structure your casual maps to be more balanced and dynamic. Map design plays an enormous role in gameplay. It is one of the main pillars of strategy building. On other games, you might only play on one map or a few maps, but on Advanced Wars by Web, we are lucky to have so many good maps and map makers, as well as the global league and tournaments that feature different maps. This constant rotation of maps keeps the game fresh and invites players to adapt and innovate by creating new strategies on new maps. We have barely touched the surface of map design in this video, so you can see how quickly things get complicated. Don't expect your first map to be perfect. The best thing you can do if you want to get really good at map making is to make as many maps as possible. The vast majority will be bad, but every now and then you'll probably make a good map. So don't be afraid to abandon a map you didn't have any luck on and just go ahead and start fresh with a new one. We hope this video helps you in your map designing endeavors. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.